Mother Bear peeked into the vaccine room with a curious baby. What happened next was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning air felt different at Pine Valley Medical Center. Something was stirring in the thick woods that surrounded the small clinic, though nobody inside knew it yet. The smell of pine needles mixed with the antiseptic scent that always hung around medical facilities, creating an odd combination that made people feel both calm and uneasy at the same time. Dr. Sarah Chen had been working at this remote clinic for 3 years now, and she thought she had seen everything. The clinic served a scattered community of families who lived on the edge of wilderness, where bears, deer, and other wild animals were just part of daily life. But today felt strange. She couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual was about to happen. Room 2 is ready for the next appointment, called out Nurse Maya Rodriguez from down the hallway. Her voice echoed in the quiet building. It was still early, and they only had a few patients scheduled for the morning vaccination rounds. Sarah nodded and picked up the chart for their next patient, baby Oliver Thompson, 6 months old, here for his routine shots. She had given thousands of vaccines over the years, but she still felt a little nervous when it came to babies. They were so small, so fragile, and their cries always tugged at her heart. The vaccine room was her least favorite place in the clinic. It was efficient and clean, with everything she needed within arm's reach, but there was something cold about it. The white walls, the metal cabinets, the examination table with its crinkly paper. It all felt so sterile compared to the warm, living forest just outside the windows. Those windows were another thing that made her uncomfortable. They faced directly into the woods, and sometimes she felt like something was watching her from between the trees. The other staff members laughed it off when she mentioned it, saying she was just being paranoid. But Sarah had grown up in these mountains, and she knew that feeling of being observed by wild eyes. As she prepared the vaccines for baby Oliver, she heard a car pulling up outside. Through the window, she could see a young woman getting out of an old pickup truck. The woman moved carefully like she was protecting something precious. That had to be Oliver's mother. The woman looked tired, the kind of tired that came from sleepless nights with a new baby. Her long brown hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore jeans with small stains on them, probably from baby food or spit-up. But despite her exhaustion, there was something gentle and loving in the way she moved as she opened the back door of the truck. Sarah watched as the woman carefully lifted a car seat from the vehicle. Even from this distance, she could see tiny hands waving in the air, and she smiled. Babies had a way of making even the most routine days feel special. The woman, Emma Thompson, according to the chart, struggled a bit with the car seat and a large diaper bag. Sarah made a mental note to have Maya help her when she came inside. New mothers always seemed to carry half their house with them wherever they went. What Sarah didn't notice was the rustling in the trees behind the parking area. Something large was moving through the underbrush, staying just out of sight but getting closer to the building. The morning was about to become anything but routine. Emma finally made it to the clinic's front door, juggling the car seat and trying to reach for the handle at the same time. The baby inside the carrier was making happy babbling sounds, completely unaware that this was supposed to be a scary visit to the doctor. Some babies seemed to sense when something unpleasant was coming, but Oliver appeared to be one of the cheerful ones who found everything interesting. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," Maya said warmly as Emma entered the waiting room. "Right on time. How's little Oliver doing today?" "He's been such a good baby," Emma replied, setting down the car seat and stretching her back. "He slept through the night for the first time yesterday. I almost didn't believe it." Maya laughed. "That's wonderful. Enjoy it while it lasts. Some babies go through phases. As they talked, Emma began unbuckling Oliver from his car seat. The baby looked around with wide, curious eyes, taking in all the new sights and sounds of the clinic. He was a beautiful child, with soft brown hair that stuck up in all directions and cheeks that looked like they were made for kissing. His little hands reached out toward everything, as if he wanted to touch and explore the whole world. He's certainly alert, Maya observed. Some babies his age are still pretty sleepy, but Oliver looks like he wants to see everything. He's always been like that, Emma said with pride. Even in the hospital right after he was born, the nurses said they'd never seen a newborn so interested in what was going on around him. Sometimes I think he understands more than we give him credit for. What none of them realized was that Oliver's curiosity was about to attract the attention of another curious creature, one that was much larger and wilder than anyone in the clinic was prepared to handle. Outside, the rustling in the trees grew louder. Something was definitely moving closer to the building, but the sounds were still masked by the normal forest noises. Birds chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze, and the distant sound of a creek running somewhere in the woods. Sarah finished preparing the vaccines and walked down the hallway toward the waiting room. As she approached, she could hear Emma talking softly to Oliver, using that special voice that mothers seem to develop naturally when speaking to their babies. "We're just going to see the nice doctor, sweetie," Emma was saying. "It might hurt a little bit, but it's going to keep you healthy and strong." Oliver responded with a series of babbles and gurgles that sounded almost like he was trying to have a conversation. He waved his tiny fists in the air and kicked his legs, clearly excited about this new adventure. "Mrs. Thompson," Sarah called out as she entered the waiting room. "We're ready for Oliver now." Emma looked up and smiled, but Sarah could see the nervousness in her eyes. Most parents dreaded vaccination appointments, knowing their babies would cry and that they would feel helpless to comfort them. It was one of the hardest parts of Sarah's job, watching parents struggle with the knowledge that they were allowing their children to experience pain, even though it was for their own good. "He's such a happy baby," Sarah said, trying to put Emma at ease. "That's going to make this easier for both of you." As they walked toward the vaccine room, Oliver continued his cheerful babbling. He seemed completely unafraid, looking around at everything with those bright, curious eyes. Sarah found herself smiling, despite her usual pre-vaccination nervousness. But as they approached the vaccine room, something made Sarah pause. There was a sound coming from outside, a low rustling that seemed different from the usual forest noises. It was rhythmic, like something large moving through the underbrush with purpose. She shook her head, telling herself she was being silly. This was bear country, and bears moved through the woods all the time. There was nothing unusual about hearing one nearby. Oh, the clinic had been here for years without any problems. Still, as she opened the door to the vaccine room, she couldn't shake the feeling that this day was going to be different from all the others. The vaccine room felt colder than usual as they entered. The morning sunlight streamed through the large window that faced the forest, casting long shadows across the white linoleum floor. Sarah had always thought that window was too big, too exposed, but the clinic's designer had insisted that natural light would make the room feel less clinical and frightening for children. Emma settled into the chair beside the examination table, still holding Oliver in her arms. The baby continued his happy chatter, reaching toward the colorful posters on the walls that showed cartoon characters encouraging children to stay healthy. His little fingers opened and closed as if he was trying to grab the pictures from across the room. "He really is fascinated by everything," Sarah observed, washing her hands at the small sink in the corner. "That's going to serve him well as he grows up." Curious children tend to be quick learners. Sometimes I worry he's too curious for his own good, Emma replied with a nervous laugh. Last week I found him trying to pet our neighbor's cat through his crib bars. The cat didn't seem to mind, but it scared me to death. Sarah smiled as she dried her hands. That's completely normal. Babies his age are just beginning to understand that there's a whole world beyond themselves. They want to touch and explore everything. As she spoke, Sarah began preparing the vaccine table, laying out the syringes and checking the labels twice to make sure everything was correct. She had developed this routine over years of practice, and it usually helped calm her nerves. But today, her hands felt slightly unsteady, and she couldn't figure out why. Outside the window, the rustling sounds were getting closer, but they were still soft enough that neither Emma nor Sarah consciously noticed them. Oliver, however, seemed to be paying attention to something beyond the glass. His babbling had taken on a different tone, more focused, as if he was trying to communicate with something specific. "Is he always this talkative?" Sarah asked, noticing how intently Oliver was looking toward the window. "Actually, no," Emma said, following her baby's gaze. "He's usually pretty quiet in new places. It takes him a while to warm up to strangers and new environments. This is the most animated I've seen him outside of our house." Sarah paused in her preparations. There was something in Oliver's behavior that made her pay closer attention. The baby wasn't just looking around randomly anymore. He was focused on something specific, and his little body had tensed with excitement. The rustling outside grew slightly louder, accompanied by what sounded like heavy breathing. Sarah told herself it was just the wind in the trees, but deep down, she knew better. She had grown up in these mountains, and she recognized the sounds of something large moving through the forest. "Maybe we should close the blinds," Sarah suggested, trying to keep her voice casual. "Sometimes the sunlight can be distracting during the examination." But before she could move toward the window, Oliver let out a sudden squeal of delight. It wasn't his usual happy babble. This was pure excitement, the kind of sound babies make when they see something that absolutely thrills them. Both women turned to look at him, and then followed his gaze toward the window. At first, they saw nothing but trees and dappled sunlight. But then, in the shadows between the pine trees, something moved. It was large and dark, and it was definitely getting closer to the building. "What was that?" Emma whispered, instinctively holding Oliver tighter. Sarah's heart began to beat faster. She had seen that kind of movement before, during her childhood in these mountains. It was the way bears moved through the forest, purposeful but cautious, testing the air with their noses and listening for any sign of danger or opportunity. "It's probably just a deer," she said, but her voice didn't sound convincing even to herself. Oliver, meanwhile, had become completely captivated by whatever was outside. He was leaning forward in his mother's arms, his little hands pressed against her chest as if he was trying to push himself closer to the window. His eyes were wide and bright, and he was making soft cooing sounds that seemed almost like he was calling to something. The movement in the trees stopped, and for a moment, everything was completely still. Even the normal forest sounds seemed to fade away, leaving an eerie quiet that made both women hold their breath. Then, slowly, a massive shape emerged from behind a large pine tree about 30 feet from the window. It was a black bear, bigger than any Sarah had ever seen in person. The animal stood motionless for several seconds, its dark eyes scanning the area around the clinic. Its fur was thick and glossy, indicating that it was well-fed and healthy. This wasn't a desperate, hungry bear looking for easy food. This was a confident, powerful animal that belonged in these woods. "Oh my God," Emma breathed, her voice barely audible. But what happened next made both women question everything they thought they knew about wild animals and human babies. The bear took a few steps closer to the building, moving with surprising grace for something so large. As it approached, a smaller shape appeared from behind the same tree, a bear cub, probably a few months old, with fur that was lighter brown than its mother's. The cub was clearly curious about the building and the sounds coming from inside. It bounded forward with the playful energy that all young creatures seem to possess, stopping every few steps to sniff the air and look around with bright, inquisitive eyes. And Oliver responded immediately. The baby let out another squeal of pure joy, louder this time, and began waving his arms excitedly. It was as if he recognized a kindred spirit in the bear cub, another young creature that was curious about the world and eager to explore it. The mother bear heard Oliver's call and froze, her massive head turning toward the window. For a moment, the two mothers, one human, one bear, stared at each other through the glass, each protective of their young but uncertain about what to do next. "We need to call someone," Emma whispered urgently. "Animal control, or the police, or—" But Sarah found herself transfixed by what she was witnessing. The bear cub had moved closer to the window and was now standing on its hind legs, its small paws pressed against the glass just below the windowsill. It was looking directly at Oliver, and Oliver was looking back with the same intense focus. The two babies, one human, one bear, seemed to be studying each other with a fascination that transcended species. Oliver had stopped his excited squealing and was now making softer sounds, almost like he was trying to mimic the little huffing noises the cub was making. "This isn't normal," Sarah whispered, more to herself than to Emma. "Bears don't usually approach buildings like this, especially not with cubs." The mother bear took another step closer, and Sarah could see that she was also watching the interaction between the two babies. The massive animal's posture wasn't aggressive. She wasn't preparing to attack or defend. Instead, she seemed as curious about this strange encounter as everyone else. Oliver reached toward the window with both hands, his tiny fingers splayed against the air, as if he was trying to touch the cub through the glass. The cub responded by pressing its nose against the window, leaving a small smudge on the surface. Emma's grip on her baby tightened. "We need to get out of here. This is too dangerous." But as she started to stand, Oliver began to cry. Not the sharp, distressed cry of fear or pain, but the frustrated wail of a baby who wants something he can't have. He reached more desperately toward the window, his little body straining against his mother's hold. The sound of Oliver's crying had an unexpected effect on the bear cub. Instead of being frightened or running away, the little animal pressed itself more firmly against the window and began making soft whimpering sounds, as if it was trying to comfort the human baby. This was when Sarah realized that something truly extraordinary was happening. In all her years of living in bear country, she had never heard of anything like this. Wild animals, especially protective mothers with cubs, simply didn't behave this way around humans. The mother bear moved even closer, until she was only about 10 feet from the window. At this distance, Sarah could see every detail of the powerful animal. The way her muscles moved beneath her thick fur, the intelligence in her dark eyes, the careful way she positioned herself to keep both her cub and the humans in sight. But there was no aggression in the bear's posture. If anything, she seemed as puzzled by this encounter as the humans were. Oliver's crying grew louder, and he began pushing against his mother's arms with surprising strength for such a small baby. It was clear that he wanted to get closer to the window, closer to the bear cub that had captured his complete attention. Maybe we should just stay calm," Sarah found herself saying. "They don't seem hostile, and if we panic, we might trigger something dangerous." Emma looked at her as if she had lost her mind. "There's a massive bear 10 feet away from us. and you want to stay calm?" But before Sarah could respond, something even more incredible happened. The bear cub, apparently frustrated by the barrier of glass between itself and the human baby, began pawing at the window frame. The window was the type that opened outward on hinges, and the cub's clumsy but persistent efforts actually managed to push it open slightly. A small gap appeared at the bottom of the window, and immediately the scents of the forest began flowing into the room. Pine needles, earth, and the wild, musky smell of the bears themselves. Oliver's reaction was immediate and intense. He stopped crying and became completely still, his little nostrils flaring as he took in these new, primal scents. For a moment, he seemed almost transfixed, as if something deep in his genetic memory was being awakened. The bear cub, encouraged by its success in opening the window, pushed a little harder. The gap widened, and suddenly its small black nose was actually inside the room, sniffing eagerly at the strange human scents. "This is insane," Emma whispered, but Sarah noticed that she had stopped trying to leave. Like everyone else in this surreal situation, she seemed drawn into the magic of what was happening. The mother bear had now moved close enough to the window that Sarah could hear her breathing. The massive animal was watching her cub's exploration with the same mixture of concern and curiosity that Emma was showing as she watched Oliver. And Oliver, for his part, had become completely focused on the bear cub's nose poking through the window. He leaned forward as far as his mother's arms would allow, making soft cooing sounds that seemed to be his attempt at communication. The cub responded with its own soft sounds, little huffs and whimpers that somehow didn't seem threatening at all. If Sarah hadn't known better, she would have said the two babies were having a conversation. This was when the truly shocking part began. The bear cub, growing bolder by the moment, managed to squeeze its entire head through the opening in the window. Its bright eyes fixed on Oliver, and it made a sound that was almost like a purr. Oliver reached toward the cub with both hands, his face glowing with pure joy and wonder. And in that moment, Sarah realized that she was witnessing something that would change her understanding of the natural world forever. The connection between these two babies, one human, one wild, was real and undeniable. It transcended everything she thought she knew about the barriers between species, about the instinctive fear that should exist between humans and wild animals. But what would happen next would be even more shocking than anything they had witnessed so far. The bear cub, with its head now fully inside the vaccine room, began sniffing the air more intensely. Its wet nose twitched as it took in all the unfamiliar human scents. The antiseptic smell of the medical equipment, Emma's perfume, the baby powder scent that clung to Oliver's clothes. But instead of being frightened or overwhelmed by these foreign smells, the cub seemed fascinated by them. Oliver had become completely still, his bright eyes locked on the bear cub's face. The baby's usual babbling had stopped, replaced by a focused intensity that Sarah had never seen in such a young child. It was as if Oliver understood that this moment required his complete attention. "We should call for help," Emma whispered again, but her voice lacked conviction. Despite the obvious danger of the situation, she found herself as mesmerized as everyone else by the unprecedented interaction unfolding before them. Sarah slowly reached for her phone, moving carefully so as not to startle either the bears or Oliver. But as she began to dial, something made her pause. The mother bear had positioned herself directly outside the window, close enough that Sarah could see her reflection in the animal's dark eyes. The massive creature was watching Sarah's every movement, and there was something almost intelligent in her gaze. It wasn't the vacant stare of a wild animal acting on instinct. The mother bear seemed to be assessing the situation, making decisions based on what she observed. And what she observed was that the humans weren't threatening her cub. They were simply watching, just as she was. The bear cub pushed further into the room, managing to get its front paws onto the windowsill. Now, nearly half of its small body was inside the vaccine room, and it was looking around with obvious curiosity at all the medical equipment and furniture. Oliver let out a soft sound, not quite a laugh, but something close to it. He reached toward the cub again, and this time his mother didn't try to stop him. Emma seemed to be in a trance, watching her baby interact with a wild animal in a way that should have been impossible. The cub stretched its neck toward Oliver, its nose twitching as it caught the baby's scent. And then, in a moment that made all three humans hold their breath, the bear cub's nose actually touched Oliver's outstretched hand. The contact lasted only a second, but the effect was immediate and profound. Oliver giggled, a sound of pure delight that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his soul. The bear cub responded with a soft huffing sound that was remarkably similar to laughter. "Did you see that?" Sarah whispered, her voice filled with wonder. They actually touched each other, but the miracle wasn't over yet. The bear cub, encouraged by Oliver's positive response, stretched even further into the room. Its small paws scrambled for purchase on the smooth windowsill as it tried to get closer to the human baby. The mother bear outside made a low rumbling sound, not a growl of warning, but something that sounded almost like communication. The cub paused and looked back at its mother, as if asking permission for what it wanted to do next. What happened next defied everything Sarah thought she knew about animal behavior. The mother bear moved closer to the window until her massive head was only inches from the glass. She looked directly at Emma and then at Oliver, her dark eyes moving back and forth between the human mother and baby as if she was studying them. Then, incredibly, the mother bear made a soft, chuffing sound, the kind of vocalization that bears typically used to communicate with their own cubs. It was gentle, non-threatening, almost reassuring. Oliver responded immediately, making his own soft cooing sounds back at the mother bear. It was as if the two were having a conversation across the species barrier, using sounds that somehow transcended the need for words. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I don't understand what's happening," she whispered. "This should be terrifying, but it's beautiful." Sarah found herself nodding in agreement. Despite every rational thought telling her that this situation was dangerous, despite years of training about wildlife safety, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were witnessing something sacred. The bear cub had managed to get most of its body through the window now, with only its hind legs still outside. It was clearly struggling to complete its journey into the room, its small claws scratching against the windowsill as it tried to pull itself all the way in. And Oliver, as if sensing the cub's difficulty, began making urgent little sounds, his hands reaching toward the struggling animal as if he wanted to help. "He wants to help the cub," Emma said in amazement. "Look at him. He's trying to encourage it." The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. This wasn't just curiosity or fascination. Oliver genuinely cared about the bear cub's welfare. Somehow, in the space of just a few minutes, these two babies had formed a connection that went beyond anything she had ever heard of. The mother bear, seeing her cubs struggle, made a decision that shocked everyone. Instead of calling her cub back to safety, she actually moved closer to the window and began pushing gently against her cub's hindquarters, helping it climb through the opening. "She's helping it get inside," Sarah breathed. "The mother bear is actually helping her cub get into the room with us." Within moments, the bear cub tumbled through the window and landed with a soft thump on the floor of the vaccine room. For a second, it lay there looking stunned, as if it couldn't believe it had actually made it inside. Then it scrambled to its feet and looked around the room with obvious delight. Everything was new and interesting. The white walls, the medical equipment, the strange smells and sounds of the human world. But its attention quickly returned to Oliver, who was practically vibrating with excitement in his mother's arms. The baby was making continuous happy sounds, his little body straining toward the bear cub as if he wanted nothing more than to get down on the floor and play with his new friend. The bear cub approached slowly, cautiously, its nose leading the way as it investigated this strange, new environment. Step by step, it moved closer to where Emma sat holding Oliver, pausing frequently to sniff the air and listen for any sign of danger. The mother bear, meanwhile, had positioned her massive head right at the window opening. She was too large to fit through herself, but she could watch everything that happened inside the room. Her presence was both protective and reassuring, like a guardian ensuring that no harm came to either baby. When the cub was about 3 feet away from Emma and Oliver, something extraordinary happened. The bear cub sat down, just like a dog would, and looked up at Oliver with an expression that could only be described as friendly curiosity. Oliver laughed out loud, the first real laugh Sarah had ever heard from such a young baby. It was a sound of pure joy, innocent and infectious. Even Emma found herself smiling, despite the surreal danger of their situation. Can I put him down?" Emma asked hesitantly. "He clearly wants to get closer, and the cub seemed so gentle." Sarah's medical training screamed that this was a terrible idea. Wild animals were unpredictable, and even a young bear could seriously injure a human baby. But her heart, and some deeper instinct she couldn't name, told her that this situation was different from anything in the textbooks. "I think," she said slowly, "I think it might be okay. But stay close and be ready to grab him if anything changes." Emma carefully lowered Oliver to the floor, keeping her hands ready to snatch him up at the first sign of trouble. The baby immediately began crawling toward the bear cub, his movements clumsy but determined. The cub watched Oliver's approach with obvious interest, its head tilted to one side in a gesture that was remarkably similar to the way puppies looked at new playmates. When Oliver was within arm's reach, the cub stretched out one small paw, very gently, and touched the baby's hand. Both babies froze for a moment, staring at each other as if they were trying to understand something profound. Then Oliver giggled again, and the bear cub made its huffing laugh sound, and suddenly they were both moving closer to each other. What happened next would be talked about for years to come in the small mountain community around Pine Valley Medical Center. Oliver, with the fearless trust that only babies possess, reached out and actually petted the bear cub's fur. His small hand moved gently over the cub's head and ears, and the young bear not only allowed it, but seemed to enjoy the attention. The cub responded by nuzzling Oliver's arm with its nose, making soft, contented sounds that were remarkably similar to purring. The two babies were so absorbed in their interaction that they seemed completely unaware of the amazed humans watching them. "This is impossible," Sarah whispered. "I'm a doctor. I know about child development, about animal behavior. This shouldn't be happening." But it was happening, and it was becoming more remarkable by the minute. The bear cub, growing bolder, actually lay down next to Oliver, positioning itself so that the human baby could continue petting its fur. Oliver immediately took advantage of this, running his hands through the cub's thick coat and babbling continuously as if he was telling the young bear all about his short life. The mother bear outside made another soft chuffing sound, and both babies looked toward the window. The massive animal's expression was impossible to read, but there was something almost approving in her posture. "I think she likes what she sees," Emma said softly. "I think the mother bear approves of Oliver." As if to confirm this observation, the mother bear made a series of gentle sounds directed at Oliver. The human baby responded with his own vocalizations, and for several minutes there was an actual conversation taking place between a 6-month-old human and a fully grown wild bear. The bear cub, not wanting to be left out, joined in with its own sounds, creating a three-way communication that transcended every boundary Sarah had ever believed existed between species. But then, just as Sarah was beginning to think that this magical encounter might continue indefinitely, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Footsteps in the hallway outside the vaccine room. Heavy, adult footsteps that were moving quickly toward their door. Someone else was in the clinic, and they were about to walk in on a scene that would be impossible to explain or believe. The footsteps paused right outside the door, and Sarah heard the unmistakable sound of a hand reaching for the door handle. In seconds, everything was about to change. The door handle turned, and Sarah held her breath as she realized that their magical, secret encounter was about to be discovered by someone who wouldn't understand what they were witnessing. The door began to open, and Sarah found herself hoping desperately that whoever was about to enter would have the wisdom to stay calm and not destroy the incredible bond that had formed between these two unlikely friends. But as the door swung wide, Sarah's heart sank as she recognized the person standing in the doorway. It was Marcus Peterson, the clinic's security guard, a man known throughout the community for his deep fear and hatred of bears, stemming from a traumatic encounter in his childhood that had left him with both physical and emotional scars. Marcus took one look at the scene in the vaccine room, the bear cub lying peacefully next to baby Oliver, the mother bear's massive head framed in the window, the obvious contentment of all the participants, and his face went white with terror and rage. "Bear!" he screamed, reaching for the pepper spray on his belt. "There's a bear in the building!" The peaceful moment shattered like glass. The bear cub jumped up, startled and frightened by Marcus's loud voice and aggressive posture. The mother bear outside roared. Not the gentle sounds she had been making before, but a deep, warning roar that shook the windows and sent a chill through everyone's bones. Oliver, sensing the sudden change in atmosphere, began to cry. Emma snatched him up from the floor, holding him protectively against her chest. And Marcus, driven by decades of fear and trauma, raised his pepper spray toward the bear cub, his finger on the trigger. "No!" Sarah screamed, but she knew she was too late. Everything that had been magical and beautiful about this encounter was about to be destroyed by human fear and misunderstanding. The bear cub, confused and frightened, looked around frantically for a way to escape. The mother bear outside was becoming more agitated by the second, her protective instincts triggered by her cub's obvious distress. And in that moment, as Marcus prepared to spray the pepper spray that would end this miraculous encounter and possibly traumatize everyone involved, baby Oliver did something that no one expected. He stopped crying, looked directly at Marcus, and made a sound that was unlike anything anyone had ever heard from a human baby. It was a perfect imitation of the mother bear's protective roar. The sound that came from Oliver's tiny throat was so accurate, so primal, that it stopped Marcus cold. Everyone in the room stared at the baby in shock, unable to believe what they had just heard. Oliver had somehow learned to speak bear language, and he was using it to try to protect his new friend. The implications of what had just happened were staggering, and Sarah realized that this encounter was far from over. In fact, the most shocking revelations were yet to come. The sound that had emerged from Oliver's tiny throat hung in the air like an echo from another world. It was impossible, unthinkable, and yet everyone in the room had heard it clearly. A 6-month-old human baby had just produced a perfect bear roar, complete with the deep resonance and protective fury that only adult bears should possess. Marcus Peterson stood frozen in the doorway, his pepper spray still raised, but his finger no longer on the trigger. His weathered face had gone completely pale, and his hands were trembling, not from fear of the bears, but from the shock of what he had just witnessed. That baby just, he stammered, unable to complete the sentence. The mother bear outside had gone completely silent after hearing Oliver's roar. Her massive head was pressed against the window opening, her dark eyes fixed on the human baby with an intensity that was almost supernatural. It was as if she was seeing Oliver not as a human child, but as something else entirely. The bear cub, meanwhile, had stopped its frightened scrambling and was now looking at Oliver with what could only be described as recognition. The young animal approached the baby slowly, cautiously, as if it was meeting someone important for the first time. Sarah felt her scientific worldview crumbling around her. Everything she had learned in medical school, everything she thought she knew about human development and animal behavior, was being challenged by what she was witnessing. "How did he do that?" Emma whispered, staring down at her baby with a mixture of wonder and fear. "Oliver, how did you make that sound?" Oliver looked up at his mother with his usual bright, innocent expression, as if he had no idea that he had just done something impossible. He reached toward the bear cub again, making his normal baby babbling sounds, apparently unaware that he had just spoken in a language that humans weren't supposed to know. The bear cub responded to Oliver's gesture by moving closer, until it was once again within touching distance. But this time, there was something different in the way it looked at the human baby. There was a respect there, an acknowledgement that hadn't been present before. Marcus slowly lowered his pepper spray, his eyes never leaving Oliver. "In 30 years of working around these mountains," he said quietly, "I've never seen anything like this. That baby, he spoke to them. He actually spoke to them in their own language." Sarah noticed that Marcus's attitude toward the bears had completely changed. The fear and aggression were gone, replaced by a kind of awed respect. It was as if Oliver's impossible roar had somehow shown him that these bears were not the monsters he had believed them to be. The mother bear made a soft chuffing sound, and Oliver immediately turned toward the window. The baby's face lit up with joy, and he made a series of sounds that were clearly intended as a response. They weren't quite bear sounds, and they weren't quite human sounds. They were something in between. A bridge language that somehow allowed communication between species. "He's talking to her," Emma said in amazement. "He's actually having a conversation with a wild bear." The bear cub, not wanting to be left out of this communication, added its own voice to the mix. Soon, all three, the mother bear, her cub, and baby Oliver, were engaged in what could only be described as a three-way conversation using sounds that defied scientific explanation. Sarah found herself reaching for her phone, not to call for help this time, but to document what was happening. But as she raised the device, something made her pause. This felt too sacred, too private to record. Some experiences weren't meant to be captured and shared. They were meant to be lived and remembered. The conversation between Oliver and the bears continued for several minutes, with each participant seeming to understand the others perfectly. The baby's sounds became more complex, more nuanced, as if he was learning the language in real time. The bears responded with patience and what appeared to be genuine affection, treating Oliver as if he was one of their own. But then Marcus, who had been watching in stunned silence, suddenly spoke up. "Wait," he said, his voice filled with a new kind of concern. "I just remembered something my grandfather told me when I was a kid." Everyone turned to look at him, and Sarah could see that whatever memory had surfaced was deeply troubling to him. "My grandfather was part Cherokee," Marcus continued slowly. "He used to tell stories about children who could speak to animals. He called them bridge walkers, people who could cross between the human world and the animal world. Emma hugged Oliver closer to her chest. What kind of stories? Marcus hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with sharing what he was about to reveal. According to the old legends, bridgewalkers were born with a special gift. They could communicate with any animal, understand their thoughts and feelings, but the gift came with a price. What kind of price? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. The bridge walkers belonged to both worlds, but fully to neither, Marcus said quietly. As they grew older, they would be drawn more and more toward the animal world. Eventually, many of them would leave human society entirely and go live in the wild. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. She looked at Oliver, who was still babbling happily to the bears, completely unaware of the implications of what Marcus was saying. But those are just stories, Emma said firmly. Old legends. They can't be real. Marcus gestured toward Oliver and the bears. An hour ago, I would have agreed with you, but look at what's happening here. That baby is doing something that should be impossible. Maybe the old stories weren't just legends after all. The mother bear made another sound, longer and more complex this time, and Oliver responded with an equally elaborate series of vocalizations. It was clear that their communication was becoming more sophisticated by the minute. Sarah noticed something else that made her increasingly uneasy. Oliver's sounds were becoming less human and more animal-like with each exchange. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The baby was adapting to the bear's way of communicating more than they were adapting to his. We need to separate them, she said suddenly. I think Marcus might be right about the danger. But as Sarah moved toward Oliver, intending to take him from his mother's arms, the mother bear outside let out a low warning growl. It wasn't aggressive, exactly, but it was clearly a message. Don't interfere with what's happening here. Oliver heard the mother bear's warning and looked directly at Sarah with an expression that stopped her cold. For just a moment, there was something in the baby's eyes that wasn't entirely human. It was ancient, wild, and completely alien to everything she thought she knew about infants. Did you see that? She whispered to Emma. Did you see the way he looked at me? Emma nodded slowly, her face pale with worry. That wasn't Oliver. I mean, it was him, but there was something else there too. The bear cub moved even closer to Oliver, until the two babies were almost touching. And then, in a gesture that made everyone in the room gasp, the cub gently licked Oliver's hand. Oliver giggled with delight and reached out to pat the cub's head again. But this time, his touch was different. More confident, more knowing. It was as if he instinctively understood exactly how to interact with the young bear. This is escalating too quickly, Sarah said urgently. We need to get Oliver away from them before... She was interrupted by the sound of more footsteps in the hallway outside. Heavy boots moving quickly, accompanied by voices that sounded official and urgent. That'll be the park rangers, Marcos said grimly. I called them before I came to investigate the reports of bears near the building. Sarah's heart sank. Park rangers would have protocols for dealing with dangerous wildlife situations. They would have tranquilizer guns, maybe even lethal weapons if they determined that the bears posed an immediate threat to humans. They'll try to capture or kill the bears, she said desperately. They won't understand what's happening here. The mother bear outside seemed to sense the approaching danger. Her posture changed, becoming more alert and defensive. She made a series of urgent sounds to her cub, clearly trying to call the young animal back to safety. But the bear cub didn't want to leave Oliver. It pressed closer to the human baby, making distressed whimpering sounds as it sensed its mother's urgency, but felt torn between obedience and this incredible new friendship. Oliver, picking up on the cub's distress, began to cry. But his cries weren't normal baby tears. They were the complex, emotional vocalizations he had been using to communicate with the bears. He was crying in bear language, expressing his own reluctance to be separated from his new friend. The voices in the hallway were getting closer. Sarah could make out at least 2 different people, both speaking in the crisp, professional tones of law enforcement or wildlife officials. "We've got maybe 30 seconds, Marcus said, moving to close the door. "If they see this situation, they'll take immediate action to eliminate what they perceive as a threat." But as Marcus reached for the door handle, Oliver did something that none of them expected. The baby looked directly at the approaching footsteps, took a deep breath, and let out another roar. But this one was different from the first. It was louder, more complex, and filled with the authority that seemed impossible coming from such a small child. The footsteps in the hallway stopped immediately. For several long moments, there was complete silence. Then Sarah heard voices speaking in hushed, confused tones. "Did you hear that?" "What the hell was that sound?" "It came from the vaccine room, but it sounded like a bear, a really big bear." Oliver's roar had somehow convinced the approaching rangers that there was a full-grown bear inside the room with them. Instead of rushing in to help, they were now treating the situation as a dangerous wildlife encounter that required careful planning and backup. Sarah realized that Oliver hadn't just learned to speak bear language. He had learned to use it strategically. Somehow, this 6-month-old baby had figured out how to manipulate the situation to protect both his new friend and the humans in the room. The implications were staggering. "How could he know to do that?" Emma whispered. "How could a baby understand the consequences of his actions well enough to deceive trained professionals?" Before anyone could answer, they heard one of the rangers speaking into a radio. "Base, this is Ranger Williams. We've got a Code Red situation at Pine Valley Medical Center. Large bear inside the building with civilians. Requesting immediate backup and animal control unit. Approach with extreme caution." The bear cub, sensing that the immediate danger had passed, moved even closer to Oliver. The 2 babies were now sitting side by side, with Oliver's small hand resting on the cub's back in a gesture of comfort and friendship. The mother bear outside made a soft, approving sound, and Oliver responded with gentle baby talk that somehow conveyed complete understanding and affection. They're bonded, Sarah realized with a mixture of wonder and terror. In the space of less than an hour, a human baby and a bear cub have formed a connection that goes deeper than anything I've ever seen between members of the same species. Marcus was peering out the small window in the door, watching the rangers set up their equipment in the hallway. "They're treating this like a hostage situation," he reported. "They've got tranquilizer guns, and I think I saw someone setting up a high-powered rifle." Emma's grip on Oliver tightened. "They'll hurt the bears. They don't understand that they're not dangerous." "Worse than that," Sarah said grimly. "If they see what Oliver can do, if they witness his ability to communicate with the bears, they'll want to study him. He'll become a government asset, a scientific curiosity. They'll separate him from you and turn him into a laboratory experiment." The reality of their situation was becoming clear. They weren't just dealing with an unusual wildlife encounter anymore. They were caught in the middle of something that could change the world's understanding of human-animal communication. And there were people outside who would do anything to control and exploit that discovery. Oliver, meanwhile, seemed completely oblivious to the danger they were all in. He continued his gentle interaction with the bear cub, occasionally looking up at the mother bear outside and exchanging soft sounds with her. But then something happened that changed everything once again. The mother bear suddenly moved away from the window, disappearing from view. For a moment, everyone assumed she was leaving, perhaps finally deciding to retreat to safety with her cub. But seconds later, they heard sounds from the front of the building that made their blood run cold. The massive front door of the clinic was being forced open. The mother bear hadn't retreated at all. She had circled around to the main entrance and was now inside the building, moving through the corridors toward the vaccine room. Her heavy footsteps echoed through the halls, accompanied by the sounds of equipment being knocked over and furniture being pushed aside as the enormous animal made her way toward her cub. The rangers in the hallway began shouting urgent commands to each other, but their voices were filled with panic rather than professional control. Nothing in their training had prepared them for a situation where a protective mother bear was actively hunting them inside a confined space. "She's coming to get her cub," Marcus said, his voice filled with awe. "She's not running away, she's coming to rescue her baby." Oliver heard the approaching sounds and began making urgent vocalizations toward the bear cub. It was clear that he was trying to warn his friend about the danger, trying to help coordinate some kind of escape plan. And the bear cub, incredibly, seemed to understand every word. The young animal moved to the window and began making its own urgent sounds toward the corridor where its mother was approaching. It was calling to her, giving her information about the layout of the room and the position of the humans. Sarah realized that she was witnessing the most sophisticated interspecies communication event in recorded history. A human baby and two wild bears were working together as a team, sharing information and coordinating their actions in ways that should have been impossible. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. As the mother bear's footsteps grew closer, Oliver did something that made everyone in the room question everything they thought they knew about the nature of human consciousness itself. The baby closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and when he opened them again, they were no longer entirely human. For just a moment, Oliver's eyes held the ancient wisdom and primal intelligence of the wild. He looked at each person in the room with a gaze that seemed to see through them, to understand them on a level that transcended normal human perception. When he spoke, his voice was still that of a baby, but the words that came out were in perfect, clear English, far beyond what any 6-month-old should be capable of. "Don't be afraid," Oliver said, his young voice carrying an authority that silenced everyone in the room. "We're not here to hurt anyone. We're here to show you something important." The impossible had become the miraculous, and everyone present realized that they were no longer dealing with a simple case of unusual animal behavior. They were witnessing the emergence of something entirely new in human evolution, a bridge between species that could change the relationship between humans and the natural world forever. But first, they had to survive the next few minutes as a protective mother bear made her way through the clinic, determined to reunite with her cub and the mysterious human baby who had somehow become part of her family. The silence that followed Oliver's impossible words was deafening. Emma stared down at her baby with eyes wide with shock and terror. This was her child, the baby she had carried for 9 months, nursed and loved with every fiber of her being. But the voice that had just spoken was not the voice of any 6-month-old infant. "Oliver," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Baby, what's happening to you?" Oliver looked up at his mother with those strange, ancient eyes, and when he smiled, it was with a wisdom that no human child should possess. "Mama," he said gently, and now his voice was back to normal baby sounds, as if the moment of clarity had passed like a brief dream. But everyone in the room had heard those clear, articulate words. They had seen the transformation in his eyes. There was no denying what had happened. Sarah felt her hand shaking as she tried to process what she had witnessed. In her medical training, she had studied cases of accelerated development, children who showed advanced cognitive abilities at early ages. But this was something entirely different. This wasn't just advanced development. This was impossible. The sound of the mother bear moving through the clinic grew louder. They could hear her massive form pushing through doorways, her claws clicking on the linoleum floors as she systematically searched each room. The rangers' voices in the hallway had become more frantic, and Sarah could hear them calling for additional backup. "She's getting closer," Marcus said, pressing his ear to the door. "And the rangers are setting up some kind of perimeter in the main hallway. This is about to become a war zone." The bear cub had moved to the window and was making urgent sounds toward the corridor, clearly trying to guide its mother to their location. But Oliver reached out and gently touched the cub's paw, making a soft sound that seemed to calm the young animal. "He's telling the cub to be quiet," Emma realized. "He's trying to keep the mother bear from finding this room." "But why?" Sarah asked. "If they want to be reunited, why would Oliver try to prevent that?" The answer came in Oliver's next words, spoken again in that impossibly clear voice that belonged to no infant. "Because," Oliver said, looking directly at Sarah, "if she comes here now, the men with guns will hurt her. We need to wait until it's safe." The strategic thinking behind those words was staggering. Oliver wasn't just communicating with the bears. He was actively planning their safety, considering multiple variables and future consequences in ways that required abstract reasoning far beyond human infant capabilities. Marcus stepped back from the door, his face pale. "I can hear them loading tranquilizer darts," he reported. "And someone just mentioned bringing in a sharpshooter in case the tranks don't work." The mother bear's footsteps had stopped somewhere close by, probably just a few rooms away. The clinic had gone eerily quiet except for the whispered communications of the rangers and the soft sounds Oliver was making to keep the bear cub calm. Emma looked down at her baby with a mixture of love and fear. "Oliver, sweetheart, I need you to tell me the truth. What are you?" Oliver's eyes met his mother's, and for a moment they flickered between the innocent gaze of a baby and something far older and more complex. "I'm still your son, Mama," he said softly. "But I'm also something else. Something that's been sleeping in human children for a very long time, waiting for the right moment to wake up." "Sleeping in human children?" Sarah repeated. "You mean there are others like you?" "Not yet," Oliver replied, his infant voice somehow carrying the weight of profound knowledge. "But there will be. The world is changing, and humans need to learn to speak with the animals again. We've forgotten how to listen to the voice of the earth." Marcus, who had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement, suddenly spoke up. "My grandfather's stories," he said urgently. "He told me that the Bridgewalkers would return when the world needed them most. When humans had damaged the natural world so badly that only those who could speak for the animals could heal the rift." The bear cub moved closer to Oliver, pressing its small body against the baby's side. Oliver responded by wrapping his tiny arms around the cub as much as he could, creating a picture of interspecies friendship that would have been heartwarming if the circumstances weren't so terrifying. "The bears aren't here by accident," Oliver continued, his voice switching back and forth between baby babbles and clear speech as if he was still learning to control this new ability. "They were called. They felt something changing and came to investigate." "Called by what?" Emma asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer. "By me," Oliver said simply. "I've been calling to them in my dreams since I was born. I didn't know I was doing it at first, but they heard me and they came." Sarah's scientific mind was reeling. "That's impossible. Babies don't dream complex dreams, and even if they did, animals can't hear human thoughts across distances." Oliver looked at her with those ancient eyes again. "Dr. Chen," he said, using her name, though no one had introduced her to him. What you call impossible is only what you haven't learned to understand yet. The connections between all living things run much deeper than your science has discovered. The fact that Oliver knew her name sent a chill down Sarah's spine. How do you know who I am? The same way I knew the bears were coming, Oliver replied. The same way I know that Ranger Williams has a daughter named Katie who talks to her stuffed animals, and the same way I know that Marcus has been having dreams about bears ever since he was a child, even though his conscious mind fears them. Marcus stared at the baby in shock. How could you possibly know about my dreams? Because the connections are always there, Oliver said gently. Most humans just don't know how to access them anymore. But children like me are being born to help restore those connections. Before anyone could respond to this revelation, they heard the mother bear's footsteps resuming their search. She was moving more carefully now, as if she sensed the presence of armed humans and was trying to avoid a confrontation. Oliver immediately began making soft sounds toward the corridor, but these weren't the same bear vocalizations he had been using earlier. These were something else entirely. A complex series of tones that seemed to carry multiple layers of meaning. The bear cub responded immediately, adding its own voice to create what sounded like a two-part harmony. The sounds were hauntingly beautiful, unlike anything any of them had ever heard from either humans or animals. "What are they doing?" Emma whispered. "They're singing," Sarah realized with amazement. "They're actually singing together." But this wasn't just singing. It was clearly a form of communication that transcended ordinary language. The sounds carried emotional and informational content that somehow reached directly into the listeners' minds and hearts. The effect on the adults in the room was immediate and profound. The fear and tension that had been building began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of peace and wonder. Even the anxiety about the armed rangers outside seemed less pressing, as if the song was creating a bubble of calm around them. But the most remarkable effect was on the situation outside the room. The mother bear's footsteps had stopped completely, and the urgent whispers of the rangers had also gone quiet. It was as if the entire clinic had been caught in the spell of Oliver and the cub's impossible song. Then, incredibly, they heard other voices joining in. Somewhere in the building, the mother bear was adding her deeper, more resonant voice to the harmony. Her contribution transformed the song into something even more complex and beautiful, creating a three-part composition that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the building. But even more shocking was the fact that human voices were beginning to join in as well. Through the door, they could hear one of the rangers humming softly, unconsciously adding his voice to the animal song. Then another human voice joined, and another, until it seemed like everyone in the building was participating in this spontaneous interspecies chorus. "This is impossible," Sarah whispered, but she found herself humming along despite her rational mind's protests. Marcus was crying openly now, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I remember this," he said through his tears. "This is what I used to dream about as a child. Before the fear took over, I used to dream about singing with the bears." Emma was looking at Oliver with a mixture of pride and terror. "My baby is doing this," she whispered. "My 6-month-old son is somehow conducting a choir of humans and wild animals." The song continued for several more minutes, weaving all the voices together into something that felt less like music and more like a prayer or a meditation. It was as if every living being in the clinic was sharing the same peaceful, connected experience. But then, Oliver's part of the song began to change, becoming more complex and urgent. The bear cub picked up on the shift immediately, and its vocalizations became more insistent as well. "Something's wrong," Sarah said, feeling the change in atmosphere even though she couldn't understand the meaning of the sounds. Oliver's baby features had become intensely focused, and his eyes had taken on that otherworldly quality again. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of urgency. "They're coming," he said clearly. "More people. People who don't understand. People who want to capture and study what they can't explain." Through the window, they could see vehicles arriving in the parking lot. Black SUVs with government plates, and men in dark suits getting out with equipment that looked far more sophisticated than anything the local rangers would have. "Federal agents," Marcus said grimly. "Someone must have reported the situation to higher authorities." The peaceful atmosphere created by the song began to dissipate, as everyone realized that their brief sanctuary was about to be invaded by people who would see Oliver's abilities as something to be controlled and exploited. Oliver looked up at his mother with eyes that were now fully human again, but filled with a sadness that was heartbreaking to see in such a young face. "Mama," he said in his normal baby voice, "we have to go now. If the bad men take me, I won't be able to help the animals anymore, and the bears will be hurt." Emma's heart was breaking. "But sweetheart, where can we go? How can we escape?" Oliver smiled, and for a moment he looked like any normal, happy baby. "The bears know the way," he said. "They've been planning this for a long time." As if on cue, the mother bear's footsteps resumed, but now they were moving with purpose rather than searching randomly. She was heading directly toward their location, and her movement was coordinated and deliberate. "She's coming to get us," Sarah realized. "All of us." The bear cub moved to the window and made a series of urgent sounds. Oliver responded with his own vocalizations, and suddenly it was clear that they were coordinating an escape plan. But how could a massive bear help humans escape from a building surrounded by armed federal agents? The answer came in the form of sounds from the back of the building. Breaking glass, splintering wood, and what sounded like an entire wall being demolished. "She's making an exit," Marcus said in amazement. "The mother bear is literally tearing through the back wall of the clinic to create an escape route." The sounds of destruction were followed by the alarmed shouts of the federal agents, who had clearly not expected to deal with a bear that was actively working to undermine their operation. Oliver made more urgent sounds to the bear cub, who immediately began pushing at the window that had been partially opened earlier. The young animal's efforts, combined with the loosened frame, succeeded in opening the window wide enough for escape. "We're really going to do this," Emma said, looking at the opening that led to freedom. "We're going to escape from federal agents with the help of wild bears." "It's our only choice," Sarah said, making a decision that went against every instinct of her civilized, law-abiding life. If those agents get their hands on Oliver, he'll disappear into some government facility and we'll never see him again. Marcus was already moving toward the window. "I'm with you," he said firmly. "That baby is something special, something the world needs. I won't let them turn him into a laboratory specimen." The sounds of the mother bear's demolition work were getting closer, and they could hear the frustrated shouts of agents trying to coordinate a response to a situation that was completely outside their training. Oliver looked around the room at each of the adults who had decided to help him, and when he spoke, his voice carried a gratitude that seemed far too mature for his age. "Thank you," he said simply, "all of you, for believing in something impossible and choosing to protect it." Then he turned to the bear cub and made a soft sound that was clearly a command. The young animal immediately climbed back through the window, preparing to lead them to safety. Emma picked up Oliver, holding him close to her chest, as she prepared to follow a bear cub through a window and into a future that would be unlike anything she had ever imagined. "Are you ready for this, baby?" she whispered to her son. Oliver looked up at her, with eyes that held both the innocence of infancy and the wisdom of ages. "I've been ready for this my whole life, Mama," he said softly. "We all have. We just didn't know it yet." And with those words, the most extraordinary escape in recorded history began, as a human baby who could speak to animals led his unlikely family toward a destiny that would change the relationship between humans and the natural world forever. But as they prepared to climb through the window and into the unknown, none of them realized that Oliver's abilities were still growing, still evolving. The most shocking revelations about what he could do were yet to come. Sarah went through the window first, her medical training helping her navigate the awkward climb despite her trembling hands. The bear cub waited patiently on the other side, its intelligent eyes watching each human emerge into the forest clearing behind the clinic. Marcus followed, his weathered body moving with surprising agility as adrenaline coursed through his veins. As his feet touched the ground, he looked around at the dense forest that would become their refuge, and felt a peace he hadn't experienced since childhood. Emma hesitated at the window, holding Oliver close to her chest. This was the moment of no return. Once she climbed through, she would be leaving behind everything she had known about normal life. "Mama," Oliver whispered softly, "trust the path that's calling to you." With tears in her eyes, Emma carefully maneuvered through the window, cradling her extraordinary baby, as she stepped into a world where the impossible had become reality. The moment all 4 humans were outside, the mother bear appeared from around the corner of the building. Despite her massive size, she moved with gentle grace as she approached her cub and the humans who had chosen to protect him. Oliver looked up at the enormous bear and made a soft sound that was pure contentment. The mother bear responded by lowering her massive head toward the baby, her dark eyes meeting his with an understanding that transcended species. In the distance, they could hear the frustrated shouts of federal agents discovering the demolished wall and realizing their targets had escaped. Flashlight beams began cutting through the forest as search teams organized to pursue them, but Oliver wasn't finished surprising them. The baby looked around at the group, his mother, Doctor, Sarah, Marcus, the bear cub, and the mother bear. And his eyes began to glow with a soft, golden light that seemed to come from within. "Oliver," Emma whispered, staring at her child in wonder and growing concern. When Oliver spoke, his voice carried a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the very air around them. "We need to move quickly," he said, "but they won't be able to follow where we're going." He raised one tiny hand toward the forest, and immediately the trees began to respond. Branches swayed without wind, creating a natural pathway through the dense underbrush. Fallen logs rolled aside on their own, and thick vegetation parted as if invisible hands were clearing the way. "He's controlling the forest," Sarah breathed in amazement. "Oliver's actually manipulating the natural world." The mother bear made a sound of approval and began leading the way down the newly created path. The bear cub stayed close to Oliver, occasionally touching the baby's hand with its nose as if drawing comfort from the contact. As they moved deeper into the forest, Oliver's abilities continued to manifest in ways that defied explanation. Animals emerged from the shadows to watch their passage. Deer, rabbits, foxes, and birds, all standing in silent reverence as the bridgewalker passed through their domain. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter behind them, as the forest itself seemed to conspire to hide their trail. Branches closed behind them, erasing their footprints, and even the sounds of their movement became muffled by some supernatural force. After walking for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they emerged into a clearing that took everyone's breath away. It was a perfect circle of ancient trees surrounding a small meadow filled with wildflowers that glowed with their own inner light. A crystal-clear stream ran through the center, its water singing with a melody that harmonized with Oliver's soft babbling. "This place," Marcus whispered. "It's not on any map. I've hunted these woods for 40 years, and I've never seen this clearing." Oliver smiled, and when he spoke, his voice carried the wisdom of the earth itself. "It's been waiting," he said simply, "waiting for the bridgewalkers to return and awaken it." The mother bear and her cub moved to the stream to drink, and immediately other animals began emerging from the forest. Wolves, deer, mountain lions, rabbits, and countless birds all entered the clearing, their usual predator-prey relationship suspended in the presence of something greater than their instincts. Emma sat down on a moss-covered log, still holding Oliver, as she watched this impossible gathering of creatures living in perfect harmony. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Oliver looked up at his mother with eyes that held both the innocence of a baby and the ancient knowledge of the earth. "Now we begin," he said. "We start teaching humans how to listen to the voice of the world again." Sarah knelt beside the stream, watching as fish swam in patterns that seemed almost like written language. "The scientific community will never believe this," she said. "They'll say we're delusional, that we made it all up." "They don't need to believe yet," Oliver replied. "But they will when more children like me are born, when the earth calls loudly enough that even the deafest humans can hear." Marcus was standing among a group of wolves, his hand gently resting on the alpha's head, tears of joy streaming down his face. "I never imagined," he said. "In all my grandfather's stories, I never imagined it would feel like this, like coming home to a place I never knew existed." As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the ancient trees, Oliver made a sound that brought every creature in the clearing to attention. It was a call that seemed to resonate in the very bones of every living thing present. In response, the animals began to sing. It started with the birds, their voices creating a complex harmony that was joined by the wolves' howls, the bears' rumbling bass notes, and even the whispered sounds of smaller creatures. But this wasn't just animal noise, it was music, intentional and beautiful, and filled with meaning that touched the deepest parts of the human soul. Emma, Sarah, and Marcus found themselves singing along without conscious decision, their human voices weaving into the natural symphony in ways that felt as ancient as the earth itself. And at the center of it all was Oliver, his baby voice somehow conducting this impossible choir, teaching humans and animals alike how to speak the same language of love, understanding, and connection. As the song reached its crescendo, something miraculous happened. The golden light that had been emanating from Oliver began to spread, touching each creature in the clearing, and then expanding beyond, flowing through the forest like a wave of pure healing energy. Where the light touched, broken branches mended themselves, polluted streams ran clean, and sick animals were restored to health. The very air seemed to shimmer with renewed life as the clearing became a beacon of healing that radiated outward into the world. Sarah felt the light wash over her and experienced a profound shift in her understanding of medicine, of healing, of the connection between all living things. Marcus felt decades of fear and trauma dissolve as the light restored his childhood wonder and trust in the natural world. Emma felt her love for her son expand to encompass not just Oliver, but every living creature around them, as she understood for the first time that motherhood wasn't just about protecting one child, but about nurturing all of life. And the animals, from the massive mother bear to the smallest field mouse, felt the ancient compact between humans and nature restored, the broken trust beginning to heal after centuries of separation and fear. As the light began to fade and the song drew to a close, Oliver looked around at the gathering with a smile that was pure joy. "This is how it begins," he said softly. "One clearing, one song, one moment of understanding at a time. The bridge walkers are returning, and the world is remembering how to heal itself." Emma held her baby close, no longer afraid of what he was becoming, but proud beyond measure to be the mother of a child who could teach the world how to love again. Sarah made a silent vow to document everything she had witnessed, to find ways to share this knowledge with the medical community, even if they weren't ready to believe. Marcus realized that his role wasn't to fear the wild anymore, but to help other humans overcome their fear and rediscover their connection to the natural world. And the bears, having completed their sacred task of bringing the bridgewalker safely to his first sanctuary, settled down to rest, knowing that their cubs would grow up in a world where humans and animals could once again understand each other. In the distance, the frustrated shouts of federal agents faded away as they gave up their search, unable to track prey through a forest that had come alive to protect what it held most precious. As night fell over the miraculous clearing, Oliver fell asleep in his mother's arms, his soft baby breathing harmonizing with the gentle sounds of the stream and the contented sighs of the animals around them. He was no longer just Emma's baby, or even just a bridgewalker. He was hope itself, made manifest in the form of a child who could speak the language of love that all living things understood. And in clearing hidden deep in the forest, surrounded by creatures who had learned to trust again, the healing of the world began with a baby's lullaby and a mother's love. The most shocking revelation of all was that the miracle had only just begun.